Okay, so this is part 2 of my analysis of Bach's Prelude in C major. I'm going to talk about measures 5 through 11. And like I say, these printouts here are abbreviations because the song just repeats. So I've just got one half of each measure. So this is measure 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And I want to talk about several things here. In case you haven't watched part 1, it goes on for quite a while, so I've split it up in 3 videos. I talk about establishment of tonality, harmony and chord progressions, consonance and dissonance, triads and seventh chords, arpeggios versus block chords, preparation and resolution of dissonances, inclusion of all 12 tones. That hadn't happened yet, but I was introducing that concept. It starts to happen in these measures because we pick up the F sharp as our first accidental, if you will. So in this video I'm going to talk about chord inversions, this first sharp note as a leading tone, a pivot chord, modulation, and a little bit about wrist rotation. So you can learn a little bit about technique as well. So just to jump in, the first 4 measures were this. There again, that's playing in block style as opposed to the way it's written, which is arpeggiated. So measure 5, here's measure 4. Measure 5 is this. Measure 6 is this. Measure 7 is this. Measure 8 is this one. Okay, so I have to spend just a minute here talking about chord inversions. Now, when you have a triad or a 7th chord, a tree Grossmith's roots up. Okay, so this chord is based on C. So it's said to be in root position if the C is the lowest note. Now I can take this chord and play it a number of different ways here. Okay, I can invert this chord. So I can take this C, just stick with the triad right now. I can take this C and move it up to here. So the lowest note is the 3rd of the chord. Okay, so this is said to be a C major chord in first inversion. The lowest note, the only one you got to concern yourself with in terms of describing it, is the lowest note is the 3rd, and that's the first inversion. So you can play this chord like this. That's the C chord with the doubling of the C, and you can take this and move this up here. That's actually doubling the 3rd. The point I'm trying to make is when we're describing this as an inverted chord, the lowest note in this case is the 3rd. This G can be up here, the C can be up here, however you want to do it. It doesn't really matter where these other 2 tones fall, just so long as that's the tones that you're playing. Okay, so root position, first inversion, second inversion puts the 5th on the bottom. Okay, it doesn't matter how these other tones move around, but the lowest note is the 5th, so that's the second inversion. Now, if you have a 4-note chord, okay, your lowest note is the 7th. Move the 7th down to here. Then that's said to be the 3rd inversion of that chord. Okay, so the first inversion would be, this is the root position, first inversion, keeping the notes as close together as possible. Second inversion, the 5th is on the bottom. Third inversion, the 7th is on the bottom. So with this D minor 7 chord that we ran into in measure 2, the C was on the bottom. Okay, so that's a D minor 7 chord with in 3rd inversion. Now you'll say, okay, in measure 1, right hand is playing the second inversion of the C chord. Now we don't call this the second inversion because the lowest note is the C. Okay, so the lowest note is the C, E, G, C, E. Okay, so this is said to be root position. The tones that you hear the most prominently in a piece of music are usually the lowest and the highest. Okay, so it's interesting that his two bass notes are the C and the E, as well as being the two outermost notes. So he wanted this first measure to be unquestionably all about C major. Okay. Now the second measure is this this third inversion of the D minor 7th chord. Now the measure 3 is this 5/7 chord talked about, this G7 chord. It's in first inversion because the lowest note is the third of the chord. The lowest note is the B. Okay, and then the next chord, of course, is this, back to a root position. Now you'll notice something that happened. When I was here, my two outer tones, which there again are the most prominent, are dissonant, B and F. This is a tritone. Okay, remember the tritone splits the octave exactly in half. It's the space of two minor thirds apart. Okay, if you don't know what a tritone is, and you need some help with your music theory, watch the video I did about tritones and the whole tone scale. But this tritone is dissonant, most definitely. And I talked about how this was prepared and resolved. Here's how it resolved. Back to the C and the E, which was the outer tones of the first measure. Okay, so we went from here to here. This F prepares me for dissonance here. Okay, now this voice here moves up, and this voice moves down. Okay, now what the principle at work here is what's happening with this B is a leading tone. Okay, it's the 7th degree of the C scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back to the octave. The 7th tone is what's called a leading tone. I compare it to like a wheelbarrow effect. The guy's finished with what he's doing, and he takes his hands and dumps the wheelbarrow out. Back to C. Okay. Now, the third of every major chord can have this leading tone effect. So the third of the C chord takes you to the F if you move up. The third of the G chord takes you to C if you move up. So in this case, the third, this is in measure 3, this third leads you back to C. Now I talked about this 7th, in this case, measure 3, the 7th is this F. The 7th usually moves down. Okay? So if this third moves up and this 7th moves down, look where you're at, C and E. Okay? So that's probably the most common chord progression there is, the so-called 5/7 chord going to the 4th degree of the scale. So in this case, this C major with the added 7th is going to the F, which is the 4th degree of the C scale. This G major with the 7th, this third is a leading tone to C. This F usually will move down because it's a minor 7. Takes you to C, which is the 4th degree of the G scale. So this is a very almost cliched way of that music is written, where you have this movement by fourth. Okay, so it's almost composing using the circle of fifths, and it's very common. Right, most common thing in Western music. So, anyways, here's the first four measures again. Now, I said C and E, that's C major, but it's also, now just because he played these two notes on the bass doesn't mean that's the only direction that it took. Obviously, there's incalculable different directions, but sticking with the theme here, instead of going to C major, measure 5, it goes to A minor, A, C, E. Now, when we have two scales, what I'm going to talk about is the scale of C, and now the scale of G. We can have chords that are in common with each other, so with each scale. So in this case, A minor, the A is the 6th degree of the C scale, and it's also the 2nd degree of the G scale. So this A minor chord is common to the C scale as well as the G scale. So this can be used, and this is how it's used in this case, as what we call a pivot chord. A pivot chord is just like, okay, you're going down the road, you stop for just a second, and here we stop on A minor. You say, okay, I'm going to take a different direction. I'm going to go to G. So that's measures 5 through 8. Now, what makes this a pivot to G is not this A minor, but this chord, which is this D major 7 chord, D major, with its added minor 7th. Remember, the major 7th would be here. Instead, it's here. Now, the dissonant tone, like I say, is the 7th. It's dissonant in two ways. It's dissonant from the D to the C. That's dissonant. And it's dissonant to this F sharp. It's tritone from C to F sharp. So you got that double dissonance, if you will, that in the ears of 18th century composers would have to be resolved. Okay, so the 7th is going to move down, and this 3rd as a leading tone is going to move up. And look where I'm at. B, D, G, or G, B, D. Okay, so in measure 7, measure 6 is this. We take this 7th and move it down. We take this F sharp and move it up, and we've got this G chord. Okay. Now, this preparation and resolution thing was happening. This C, which is dissonant to this D major chord. This is the minor 7th, and it's in 3rd inversion, okay, because the 7th is the lowest note. This C was prepared by being introduced a measure before, and it's resolved by moving down. So the C moves down. So that's back to that preparation and resolution thing again. And you have this traveling around the circle of fifths idea. A, D, G, C. The 4th of A is D. The 4th of D is G. The 4th of G is C. And that's what happens. We've got these inverted chords. D dominant 7th chord. I hate the way they describe these kind of chords, but because it's the D7 chord, okay? Just call it that. Goes to G, which goes to C. Now, these are all inverted chords. Third inversion of the 4-note chord, the D7 chord. First inversion of the G chord, because the third is on the bottom, to another third inversion of a C7 chord. Now this is a different type of 7 than what we've been talking about. This is a major 7. Okay. This chord is part of the C scale, and it's also part of the G scale. There's no accidentals here, okay? Now, keeping in with the theme, at this point, some people like to call these secondary dominants, okay? This F sharp was not part of the C scale, but it's thrown in here to take you to G. This F sharp is what takes you to G, as well as this 7th, which takes you to G. So, if the F sharp moves up and the 7th moves down, there you are, G, B. Okay, so that's G major. And then you add the 5th and complete the chord. Okay, so you can think of this tritone here as shrinking. Same thing that happened with this G7 chord. Okay, so this third is a leading tone to C. This minor 7th wants to drop down. So this tritone here resolves. Okay, so that's why it's so convenient for the composers to write music where this 5-7 chord goes ahead and goes to the 4th note of your root. Okay, so this dissonance gets resolved. Third goes up, 7th goes down. Okay, it's one of the most common things in all of music. So we've got this. Oops. Okay, now this B, in this case, this is measure 8. What's the dissonant tone here? This B. This B was introduced to measure before. Now it's going to move down. Okay, so in measure 9, B went to A, and there we are again with this A minor 7th chord. A minor 7th chord in root position. The A is the lowest note. This G is the dissonant tone here, and it was prepared measure 8. So measure 9 is the A minor 7th chord. Working our way around the circle of fifths, we can jump. This is the first jump that he makes in the bass. Back to this D major 7th, D dominant 7th chord. Now this time, instead of going to an inversion of the G chord, we're going to the root position of the G chord. G is the lowest note. So it's firmly established by repetition, A minor, D major, G major, C major, not talking about just leaving the 7ths off, A, D, G, C, and repetition of that, A, D, G. So from measure 5 to measure 11, we've gone from the key of C to the key of G. Now in measure 12, he starts to go backwards to the C. The C again. So a lot of people would say that this did not leave the key of C. A lot of people would say it did leave the key of C. A modulation is just simply moving from one key to the other and then back again. The reason that a lot of people say it didn't leave C is because now the D major chord is just used so often in songs with the key of C that it's not really thought of that way as some kind of modulation. But this is a temporary modulation from C to G, okay, and it's done with this pivot tone, or this pivot chord. That's where we stop slamming on the brakes for just a second. So we're going to take a little detour over here to G. We're going to establish it by way of the 4 chord, and then we're going to go back to this this A minor chord that we started with when we decided to do this modulation. We're going to do the D7 chord again to repeat that and to establish it. Now at this point we're in G. With measure 12, he starts to go back to C, and he does that with a flat and a sharp, a B flat and an F sharp, and I'll talk about that in the next video. So the most common accidental, if you will, that you'll find in a song is your sharp 4th. So the D, instead of like in measure 2, we had a D minor. I'm sorry, D minor. So we had this. You just as easily can have this. Okay, and that's what you hear all the time. So I told you that this is written in the key of C, but it's going to include every one of these black notes. So the first black note that we've introduced here, and that's in measure 6, is the F sharp, and that's because it's the leading tone to G, just the same way that that B as part of the G chord is the leading tone to C. Okay, so the most important thing here is this preparation resolution idea and this leading tone idea. That's all throughout music. You'll see it everywhere. So I'm completed page 1 here, and the next video, of course, will start on page 2. Now, just a little aside here, as far as technique, you can improve the way you play this, especially if you're a beginner, by not playing it all with the fingers. Okay, so here's with the fingers. If I just try to play with up and down movement of my fingers, it's not near as smooth as if I put some wrist rotation into it. Now, wrist rotation, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it, but look it up on YouTube if you haven't already done so. The best teacher as far as wrist rotation is concerned is Dorothy Taubman, Taubman. She put out a series of really expensive videos. They're worth it if you can afford it. And if you really want to learn a lot about piano technique, it's hours and hours and hours of talking about wrist rotation. And wrist rotation is what allows me to do these big leaps. Okay. If I try to do this with a level hand, it's not near as smooth. Excuse me, I'm just playing random notes here. But the point is, with a wrist rotation, if I want to reach, say, the distance of a 10th, which would be an octave plus a third, so from G to this B, I can do it like this. But it's a whole lot smoother if I go like this with a wrist rotation. Okay. Same way with this song. If you try to do everything with your fingers, it's up and down with your fingers like you're sitting here typing or something, you're not going to get as smooth of musical expression as you will as if you just a little piece of advice there. And next video I will do more of this harmony analysis and so on about this song. We'll make our way all the way through the song next handful of videos. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, please ask them. And I'd like to have a little encouragement for doing this because it is a time-consuming thing, and I'd love to hear your feedback. So thanks a lot.